Let me ask you something. Do you have a guilty pleasure? Something you genuinely enjoy even though you know it's bad? Maybe it's smoking. Maybe it's rom-coms. Maybe it's daydreaming about an ideal future that you're never going to get back because you sunk tens of thousands of dollars into a degree that no one cares about, no one's going to hire you for, and you do that every single day to avoid the suppressed discontentment with your life. But for me, it's bad video games. Today, I want to share possibly my favorite bad video game. There are games that look gorgeous and function as pieces of art. There are games with depth into which you can devote yourself to mastering. There are games full of story and lore for the keen-minded to pore over and decipher. And this game has none of that. If I had to pick my favorite dumpster fire, it would have to be Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. I am going to out myself to the cyberbullies of the internet by confessing publicly that yes, I am a Sonic fan. And I'm ashamed to admit how many of the things I like as an adult may have been influenced by the blue blur in my childhood. Sonic got introduced from 3 different places around the same time for me. There was the Sonic X anime, Sonic Advance 3 for the Game Boy Advance, and what we're here to talk about today, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for the Nintendo GameCube. The Sonic X anime even covered some of the events in Sonic Adventure 2 with Project Shadow, which of course I bought with yard work money as a kid. Now, if you have working eyes, you may have noticed something about each of these on screen. They're all the same Sonic. Well, I mean, Adventure changed his shoes, but I thought the new ones were cooler anyway, so yeah. To me, this was Sonic. Cool, rebellious, and marching to the beat of his own drum going at yes beats per minute. My Sonic was introduced by casually outracing government-funded F1 cars. Because of that, when I later got introduced to the original Sonic from the early 90s, I went, that's not the real Sonic. In the same way that growing up with the Pokemon Advance Battle led me to go say, that's not the Pokemon theme song. Also, about that original Sonic, 90s Sonic was made by, and I quote, the incredible world of Beak. Real 90s kids hate me because I was born in their decade. Anyway, Sonic Adventure 2 was the sequel to Sonic Adventure released in 2001 on the ill-fated Sega Dreamcast. However, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was an updated port of the game to Nintendo GameCube that came to America in 2002. It's a 3D platformer split into 2 different story campaigns and 3 different styles of gameplay split across 6 different characters. And to make sure that you never got comfortable with a particular gameplay style, the player is made to switch characters for every single mission, seemingly in a random order. And in order to deal with those really pesky gamers capable of that wizardry called adaptation, the devs then threw in a really janky kart racing level that only ever comes up once. Until Rouge has to do it. The idea to play 6 different characters is something that carries over from the previous game, except where in Adventure you play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Big, Amy, and Gamma. This time players will be controlling Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, Rouge, and Eggman. But not to worry for fans of the original, as Amy is now a side character, Big is an Easter egg in a lot of precariously worrying places, and Gamma dies. As many times as you want. Even Chaos, the main villain and repeating boss of the last game, returns as these bioweapons created by Gun in order to get in your way and stop you. Despite again controlling 6 characters, the gameplay is literally more than twice as streamlined, with Adventure 2 doing away with the overworld that you had to navigate to find your way to the actual levels, as well as cutting the number of gameplay styles you learn in half. In the first game, each character had different goals and mechanics, and in the second, each character gets sorted into pairs based on their design archetype. Sonic and Shadow make up the speed archetype, and their levels entail running through a sprawling, winding track in order to reach a goal as fast as possible. Knuckles and Rouge make the hunter archetype, with both of them going on scavenger hunts for different important items in a larger open space with a lot of verticality, and Tails and Eggman make up the mech archetype. They have the player run through enemy-infested levels, gunning down everything in their path, and if you can't go down that path, blow it up and keep going. Sega used this to create a rivalry between each of the characters, with Tails and Eggman constantly competing to outsmart one another, Rouge and Knuckles competing to see who can get the pieces of the Master Emerald first, and Sonic and Shadow competing to see who the real hedgehog is. They're both hedgehogs. Yeah, okay, that one's pretty stupid. And speaking of stupid, okay, I'm gonna get on my soapbox for a second. Can we talk about how hilariously racist this game is? First off, since more than likely players will have started with the hero path, you know, the path where you get to play as Sonic in the Sonic game, they won't have seen Eggman breaking out Shadow or know what's going on there in chronological order. So as far as we're concerned, the game just starts with Sonic being arrested by the military for absolutely no reason. And then he breaks out, we all get that iconic escape from the city snowboarding segment, and then we get the inciting incident for the conflict that brings Sonic into the story in the first place. Shadow has been wreaking havoc ever since he was released by Dr. Eggman and has been framing Sonic for it. Except he hasn't been framing Sonic for it. People are just framing Sonic for Shadow. They just look at Shadow going rogue, blowing up things and evading the military and go, I can't believe Sonic would do such a thing. Which, I mean, Sonic was literally doing that the entire previous level, but that's not the point. They look nothing alike. They literally have contrasting color palettes, with Sonic being blue and Shadow being black with red highlights. The only thing they have in common is that they're both anthropomorphic hedgehogs, which is like saying, they'll never suspect a thing. After all, I am the ultimate life form. Hey, what are you doing? Now I see. The military's been mistaking me for the likes of you. Wow, that's kind of racist. We look nothing alike. I know. Now turn yourself in, faker. Wait, what? I'm the coolest. Ah, yes, I can see by the fact that you have 4 limbs, a face, and breathe air that surely you were the rogue human responsible for all the destruction over the past few days. But I... Don't ignore me, human. I knew it was you all along. Ignore? If you haven't gotten the gist yet, this game's story is stupid. Also, Knuckles isn't a treasure hunter. He's the guardian of Angel Island and the Master Emerald. And while we're at it, why is the Master Emerald not on Angel Island? How did it get to not Egypt? And how did Rouge find it? And since we're already asking the important questions here, how was Sonic able to use Chaos Control when he didn't actually have a real Chaos Emerald? Can Tails just now manufacture the power of Chaos, the literal most powerful source of energy in the Sonic universe? And most importantly, why does Shadow not know what Chaos Control is at the end of the game after the Bio Lizard uses it? It's literally his signature move! Now, with all that being said, with the story being nonsense, the gameplay being cluttered, and the visuals looking like they came from my lifetime ago, you may be asking yourself the same question I did. Why do I love it so much? Certainly an element is nostalgia, I'm not gonna pretend that it's not. It was a big part of my childhood, and none of the flaws that fall apart under scrutiny now mattered back then. But more so, I think the game encapsulated that rebellious skateboard punk attitude of the early 2000s that I just loved. And that comes from both the heroes and the villains. It was such a stark contrast to Mario's vibe that I got from Mario 64 and Sunshine. Where Mario was rounded and safe, Sonic was edgy and exciting. Where Bowser becomes the size of a moon to kidnap a single person, Eggman blows up the moon and says, "You're next." Eggman always felt like a villain with grand ambitions who was genuinely capable of taking over the world if you didn't stop him, and for me, that always made him more compelling than similar villains that just felt like defeating a monster of the week. And speaking of edgy, I'd argue that Shadow is the quintessential edgy character of the 2000s, and despite how cliche it's all become with time, his introduction created a genuine contrast when put against Sonic. Sonic's attitude was bright and exciting with an air of being nonchalant, while Shadow's was dark and reserved while being overly serious and in control. His design only emphasized this, with Sonic being blue, a color that evokes a sense of ease or familiarity, while Shadow's color palette lets you know that he's dangerous with all the red sprinkled through his design, along with the signature color being black, evoking a sense of mystery, coolness, or fear of the unknown. And here's a very simple design choice that I think is my favorite thing about Shadow in comparison to Sonic, which actually really tripped me up as a kid. The shape of the quills on his head. Sonic's spikes are all swept back and angled down, which gives him a streamlined aerodynamic look that feeds into the perception that he's the fastest. Then in comes Shadow, his spikes bent upward. It's something that seems pretty pointless until you consider the fact that Sonic's spikes look exactly like that when he goes into his supersonic form. an insane conditional power-up that Sonic only gets presented with when all of the Chaos Emeralds are there at once, which both makes him faster, invincible, and able to fly. Essentially, Sonic's spikes only stand up like that when he has the powers of a god, and Shadow's look like that all the time, even in his base form. It's a look that fans of Sonic associate with Super Sonic, at least up to that point, and it makes Shadow seem more powerful than Sonic by default, which only gets compounded on by Shadow's ability to spam Chaos Control all the time, something that Sonic only generally does while in his super form if he uses it at all, except for the one time. As a kid, hearing that Shadow was the so-called ultimate life form, seeing him use Chaos Control all over the place, and the upward spikes actually led me to believe that what made Shadow so special is that he's essentially always in super mode all the time, which is what would make him the ultimate life form over Sonic. Of course, that ended up not being true at all, and Kid Wolf EX was very confused when Shadow turned silver at the end of the game, which design-wise sets him below Sonic because he was gold. Aight, side note. I always assumed that Shadow was silver in his super form because he's clearly a very light, if not white, metallic color as a base with a yellow tinge to it, probably from his aura that he's always in, and especially in the transformation scene, because there's yellow everywhere and he's literally right next to Sonic, who's a bright neon golden yellow. But then I saw Shadow's super form in future media and realized once you strip away the metallic texture from this specific game, he still has that yellow tinge to him, which means it's not something reflecting off of the metal texture in the game. So if he always has that yellow in the color, I guess that means he's meant to be white gold? That'd make some sense for the sake of contrast. His main color is black, and going super is associated with gold, so the super form is based on white gold to create the duality between white and black. Then again, the wiki calls it lemon cream or whatever. That's stupid. I'm calling it white gold. So if I had to pick one thing that I like more about the games now than when I initially played it, aside from laughing at how unapologetically broken the game is, it would have to be how much the Sega Sound team absolutely killed this game's soundtrack. Now, granted, the audio mixing of the game is an atrocity, so it's not like the whole game has great sound design or anything, but the design of each individual track of music relative to the character that it represents? Immaculate. Perfect. Each of the game's tracks has a unique identity based on the identity of the character and whose level it plays. I'd argue that breaking down the design of the music will tell you more about the personality of each of the characters than the actual game does. And who knows, maybe I'll make an entire video about that, but just to keep me from rambling on about music for the next 20 minutes, let's just look at Sonic and Shadow again. Sonic's music is all fast-paced rock with a bright feeling. Whenever they're singing, it's clear and uplifting, and he's the one with the most variation with his instruments. Brass plays and backs up the main theme of Metal Harbor, which is an appropriate touch considering that Metal Harbor is now being accompanied by metal instruments. Likewise, the organ playing in the theme of Pyramid Cave is a sound that's much more subdued. Some may even say, buried. Meanwhile, all of Shadow's themes are also rock songs that are just as fast-paced as Sonic's, but they make changes that create a contrasting identity all their own. The most standout feature of Shadow's music is that they all feature synths and extra distortion, sounds not made by natural instruments like those present in Sonic's tracks. This is indicative of the fact that, unlike Sonic, Shadow isn't natural. He's an artificially made creature, and so his music features artificial instruments. The leading electric guitar is more aggressive and erratic, and even all of the vocals are distorted and muffled, as though someone is singing through the wall of the next room over. And yet, despite all of these changes that make his music sound more chaotic than Sonic's, it isn't. It's actually more consistent, as almost every single track that Shadow has uses the exact same components every single time, where Sonic more freely dabbles in new or different sounds. This creates a split between Sonic representing his ideal of freedom and living life to the fullest, while Shadow represents the ideal forced upon him by his creator and a rigid adherence to that mission. This split is why the theme song, Live and Learn, that plays during the final boss fight hits so hard. It's a song that combines all of the ideas I mentioned between the two characters, and it only plays when those two antithetical characters decide to finally work together and combine their powers for one cause. The vocals are undistorted and bring an encouraging power-through message, but the delivery is much more aggressive and angry than in Sonic's songs. The song opens with a distorted, seemingly reversed electric guitar sound before snapping back into playing normally for the opening drop, and then going back to a short, distorted breakdown that leads into the aforementioned clean vocals being introduced. It's the perfect blend to cap off these two different characters coming together for a common cause, and represents the culmination of Shadow's character arc in the game. Starting off as a villain and a bioengineered monster, and slowly transitioning into a tragic anti-hero as the actions of Sonic and the last words of his late friend Maria finally begin to reach him. What more can I say? It's a game that, despite all of its mass dysfunction and stupidity, presented a compelling subversion of the "ooh, evil doppelganger is evil" trope, seemingly before the evil doppelganger became a mainstream cliché. By the end, Shadow is more the main character than Sonic is, having undergone a full character arc and finally defeating the lie that the character believed in order to save the day. Sonic Adventure 2 Battle is a game that, admittedly, takes a lot of effort to get going. But when it gets going, it goes fast. Seeing how Sonic Frontiers is coming out, I really wanted to talk about this while Sonic was on people's minds. I've already got a transparent review for Sonic Adventure 2 in the works to go along with this video, so that should come out sometime soon after. For those of you who stuck around to the end, thank you so much for watching and hearing me ramble about something I'm passionate about. Please consider subscribing if you would, and I'll see you, yes you, next time. Also, I hope for his sake that I love my firstborn son the way I love my child. This boy is precious and I love him.